Afternoon, everyone. I'm Mario Ortiz, and thank you for joining us today. I am a dean, professor, and the Decker Endowed Chair in Community Health Nursing at Binghamton University in beautiful upstate New York. I am a former member of the Fellows Selection Committee and also served as the chair of the Academy's Triad and Rubric Task Force. On behalf of the Academy, I am excited to share some updates with you regarding the 2026 Fellowship Application Cycle and to facilitate a dialogue with our speakers today, who I would like to introduce to you. Kimberly Glassman, Dean, Mount Sinai Phillips School of Nursing, and Maureen McLaughlin, Senior Advisor, McChrystal Group. Throughout the session, please enter your questions into the Q&A box on the screen. As a policy organization and honorific society, the American Academy of Nursing Fellows encompass a wide range of perspectives, experiences, and expertise. Fellows are transforming healthcare and propelling forward sound health policy solutions. Academy Fellows are inducted into the organization for their extraordinary contributions to improve health locally and globally. With more than 3,300 fellows, the Academy represents nursing's most accomplished leaders who work towards our mission to improve health and achieve health equity by impacting policy through nursing leadership, innovation, and science. Annually, the Academy receives hundreds of qualified applications from stellar candidates seeking to become a fellow. I would like to recognize and thank all the fellows who provide sponsorship for these candidates. We know the time, effort, and care that goes into each sponsor statement and the dedication you put into it to help shepherd your candidate through the fellowship application process. If you have not sponsored yet, I encourage you to consider sponsoring a candidate. As a reminder, fellows can sponsor 2 applicants per year. You may be familiar with how the selection process works, but I thought it would be helpful if I provided a brief overview, as there are some key updates that will be introduced for the upcoming application cycle as a result of the Triad and Rubric Task Force recommendations. These were approved by the Academy's Board of Directors in October of this year to strengthen the Academy's fellow selection process and adapted to in accordance with the high volume of applications we continue to receive. The 2026 fellowship application will open on January 6th and will close on February 10th. We recognize many of you are already working to prepare statements and application materials. To apply for fellowship, applicants will complete a series of questions that demonstrate how their individual contribution has significant, substantive, and sustained impact on health, as well as how their work advances the Academy's mission and work. Applicants also fill out an online CV form and provide sponsor statements from 2 Academy Fellows who can attest to their impact. Our panelists today will provide more insight into the sponsor-applicant relationship and how important it is in producing a strong application. Prior to application review, the Fellow Selection Committee and International Subcommittee members, which has been expanded and consists of elected and appointed members, are grouped into teams of 3, which we call triads. This is a change from prior years as a way to further bolster inter-rater reliability. Previously, applications were reviewed by 2-member teams called dyads. Each triad is assigned applications to review individually. Then they meet with the triad partners to discuss their scores to reach a consensus on any differentiating scores. The leadership of the Fellow Selection Committee reviews the scores, then the full committee comes together for a final selection meeting where a robust discussion and final decisions are made on who will and will not be recommended for induction. Prior to review, the committee members identify any conflicts of interest, attend an orientation session, as well as an unconscious bias training and a mock review session. Now, specific to the application, the Academy has undergone an extensive review process and has made some updates that I would like to address. First, definitions for key terms in the application have been developed to help support applicants and sponsors. Additionally, the application questions have been revamped to align with the key terms. The overall format and sections of the CV template remain the same. However, some word count limits have been revised. These refinements are designed to strengthen the clarity, fairness, and consistency of the application process for both applicants and reviewers. Now let's take a look at the key definitions that have been introduced for the 2026 application. First, individual contribution. This refers to clearly identifiable and measurable impact made through one's defined role, leadership, and/or expertise that extends beyond formal duties to drive outcomes. These contributions are documented, influence broader professional contexts, and are critical to the success of initiatives or policies. One aspect here to keep in mind is that your contribution should extend beyond your formal job responsibilities. Think about what your impact has been beyond that. For significant impact, this refers to something that can be demonstrated, has evidence-based contributions that has or will continue to make current and lasting improvements in health, healthcare, and/or nursing. The impact should directly address improving health and advancing healthy lives for all people, and should be supported by data or widespread adoption and reflect innovation or leadership. The CV component of the application is a great place to highlight data to support your impact. Substantive impact is defined by its depth, relevance, and broad reach across populations, organizations, or environments. The impact should provide evidence of shaping and informing health policy, nursing practice, education, or care improvement. It must address priority issues such as advancing nursing or promoting healthy lives for all people, with outcomes that are scalable and replicable. As I mentioned, what is unique about Academy Fellows is that we represent the breadth and depth of the profession. We make an impact across varying populations, organizations, and environments. Fellows serve in a wide range of roles from deans, hospital executives, elected officials, state and federal political appointees and government officials, university presidents, chancellors, faculty, researchers, entrepreneurs, nurse scientists, association executives, and in so many different positions, I could not possibly name them all. Now for sustained impact. It is the demonstrated continued delivery of outcomes that remain valuable. Examples may extend beyond their original context, adapt to changing conditions, and address core or systematic challenges through evolving, layered contributions to health. I want to take a moment and emphasize that fellows also range in terms of their career stage, so please keep in mind and don't be discouraged by the terminology sustained impact if you are an early or mid-career nurse. These definitions have been incorporated into the application questions. Much time, thought, and assessment went into refining the questions for clarity. The first question is a two-part question. This is where applicants can explain what their contribution is and the context in which it occurs. Applicants may have a primary and secondary area of contribution. So the applicants will add their thoughts about what one or two areas that they feel are their strongest impact to highlight throughout their application. Applicant question 1 then is to summarize your individual contribution on the national, international level, or describe a state, regional effort demonstrating potential for scalable impact. The Academy has provided a definition, which I went through earlier, for individual contribution and reference. What is interesting for this question is to think about either at a national level or at an international level, and then is it scalable from a state or regional project? So the first part of the question is summarize the primary area or areas of individual contribution. That is service, practice, education, advocacy, policy, government, military, research, or other. Note, you do not need to demonstrate contribution in all areas. It is best to focus on your primary and secondary, if applicable, areas. And here you'll have 100 words from which to do that. The next part, or the second part of the first question, is describe the context in which your individual contribution occurs. That is, be sure to clarify for the reviewers the specific role that you have in the setting as applicable to this application. So if you're working on projects that have many people involved, you must clearly delineate what your contribution was, and then later on, you'll talk about the impact of that contribution. This question number 2, has been broken out into 3 distinct parts. So as you can imagine, this is a key question. So applicants should really take their time and be thoughtful in their response as they have the opportunity to describe their significant, substantive, and sustained impact. So as you will notice here, we have split this out into 3 distinct areas that you will answer. So the question reads as a prompt, Describe the significant, substantive, and sustained impact of your individual contributions identified in question number 1 that is the focus for this application. Be as specific as possible, providing data to support the impact of your work. Ensure that the information listed in your CV aligns with the description provided. The Academy has provided definitions that I went through earlier for significant, substantive, and sustained impact. So here you answer each of these in paragraph form. So you'll have about 250 words to describe your significant impact, your substantive impact, and then the sustained impact. And you'll work closely with your sponsors to flesh out these areas so that they are clear and applicable to your individual impact. Finally, applicants, if they do become a fellow, have the opportunity to briefly describe how they plan to engage with the organization. Yes, they will obtain the FAN credential, but the Academy is an honorific society as well as a health policy organization. So ideally, incoming fellows will be able to contribute to the mission of the organization by leveraging their expertise or volunteering their time, treasure, or talent to support the Academy. So for this, question 3 will address the Academy's mission is to improve health and achieve health equity by impacting policy through nursing leadership, innovation, and science. If selected for fellowship, describe how you plan to use your expertise to advance the Academy's work and actively engage with the organization. Again, much thought and discussion went into refining the definitions and questions, and we hope they serve as a better and clearer guide for both the applicants and the sponsors as they describe the impact of the applicants and their work over time. Next, I would like to address the updates to the sponsor section. Applicants must work closely with their sponsors throughout the application process. The sponsor statements should amplify the applicant's contribution and impact, should not duplicate each other, and should emphasize the applicant's impact. This requires that the sponsors know the applicant well and can verify, as well as attest to, seeing their work implemented. That's why the sponsor statement prompt and attestation has been updated as well. So the prompt that the sponsors will address is that each sponsor statement should augment the impact of the applicant's individual contribution in the primary area or areas in which it occurred by citing evidence of their significant, substantive, and sustained impact and be unique from each other. That is, it should offer an additional perspective rather than repeat or replicate information already stated by the applicant or other sponsor. And here there'll be a 500-word limit for each sponsor. Once that is completed, the sponsor will have an electronic signature that confirms that you have authored your sponsor statement, that you know the applicant's work well enough to speak to their individual contribution, review the evidence supporting the applicant's qualification for fellowship in the Academy, and that you can verify to the best of your knowledge the information presented is valid, of significant quality, and adheres to the Academy's current criteria. Now, I know that that was a lot to digest and take in a matter of minutes. But I know our speakers will address this, but the role sponsors play is critical to the applicant's success, hence why the sponsor questions have been updated, as well as to provide clearer guidance. So in light of our speakers today, let's hear from them. If at any point you have a question for our speakers, please type it in the Q&A box. So Kim, could you please start by discussing key aspects of communicating impact as it relates to individuals who have practice roles?
Yes, happy to. Something near and dear to my heart because although I'm a dean right now, I had 42 years on the practice side and I got into the academy while I was in those roles. So I'll start with just a quick story, which is my own story, which I think is illustrative of sometimes why it's a little more difficult for people in practice to think about impact because we're so busy doing. So I had a work life event where I evacuated a hospital in the middle of a hurricane, and that story, if you will, featured in my initial narrative. And I happened to have a meeting with someone from the Academy board who was known for being very outspoken when she was on the board. And she read this and she said, "Oh, so you evacuated a hospital during a hurricane. Big deal. What was the impact?" And I was taken aback because that was a pretty significant life event. But it really hit home that it isn't about the good work or the amazing work that you do. It's how does that make the world a better place? And for those of us in practice, nurse leaders, CNOs, et cetera, who are really busy doing, I don't think we stop to think about the impact of what we do. So in that case, what I had failed to realize is FEMA came to talk to me to learn about that experience and subsequently change national regulations based on what had been done. But that didn't come out until probably 6 months of conversations with my sponsors because it wasn't top of mind. So that's one of the reasons that it's really important to have this relationship with sponsors who can just help pull out the things that you're not seeing because you're so busy doing. So, chief nurses of a hospital, a small hospital, a community hospital, rural hospital, large hospital, do wonderful work in the course of your time in that role. But that would be considered local impact in one organization. What you want to be able to do is figure out how what you've done has been spread beyond your organization. So, have you been part of a consortium or some type of a professional group where you have been able to bring your good work to a broader group? Maybe it's a national group, maybe it's a committee, some type of a consortium that your hospitals may be part of. But those are opportunities to bring what you do out into the world. And so those are things that you have to look for if you don't have those opportunities today. System chief nurse executives, right? People who have systems that go across the country. Kaiser comes to mind, right? Enormous system. The job of that chief nurse executive is a big footprint, and a lot of what they do is their job. So, how do you leverage all of the great work that's going on in this large system and bring it outside of the organization? So, these are the conversations that you should be having with yourself. A lot of the material on the website, I think, helps to be able to bring this forward. Many of us are part of professional organizations, and some of us have been part of these organizations for a long time. Maybe you're on a committee. You might want to position yourself to chair a committee or to get on the board of the organization. And I'm not saying you need to wait 10 years to be the president of a national organization, but most of us who are in broad leadership positions have a life outside of the organization. That life involves professional organizations, it involves consortiums, it may involve work in the community. There's a lot of great work that goes on in health systems. How does some of that work get brought into the community to impact the people that you serve? So, as Mario noted, you have to be able to quantify this. So when I think of some successful applications, I also was on the fellow selection committee that I have looked at, nurse practitioners, others. A lot of their work happened in professional organizations, in lobbying, at a state organization, getting full practice for nurse practitioners in a southern state. That was a big deal. And that was able to be quantified. Many states have it, but to do it in a state where you're fighting an uphill battle and being able to write that clearly and then quantify it, that's one example of how practice people are able to do really good work. And I would end by saying that those of you in practice, we need you in the academy. The academy needs people with different views, different ideas, different perspectives. it is often viewed as an organization that is heavy on academics. That's largely because an academic career offers you a lot of opportunity to publish and to get grants and do things that describe impact really well. Those of us in practice, particularly those of you who are chief nurses, one of the things that I have said at the academy is you can afford to pay the dues in the academy. And if we rely on people who are making less money than chief nurses in this country to keep this organization alive, and if we don't expand and work really hard to bring practice people in, then the organization is not going to move forward. There is room for everybody. And I would urge you all to look at how you can make those applications go forward.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Kim. I think your insights as serving as a chief nurse for, so long in such a large system that it gives people an idea about what is impact beyond that role. So thank you for sharing that. Um, Now I would like to turn it over to Maureen. Could you please give the audience your perspective regarding how sponsors can best amplify the impact of practice applicants or those candidates who have roles outside of academia?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm really delighted to be with you today and really echo Kim and Mario's comments about the importance of having a practice presence in the academy. I am charged with talking about the role of the sponsor, and this will overlap nicely with what Kim has shared. My perspective also comes from having been a nurse executive and healthcare executive for more years than I'm going to report, um, and also serving on the fellow selection committee. And I was thinking about the successful applications that I've supported and the one that did not fly. And I've tried to tease out some of the important things, particularly around the one that was not successful. So I'd like to really emphasize that successful sponsorship starts with an authentic relationship where you know the candidate. The second part of that is you need to believe that they are or they will be ready for consideration by the Academy's committee. And there's really two paths to sponsorship, and there may be a third that I haven't identified. One is where it's sponsored initiated, and the second is where an applicant, which you may know well or not know so well, approaches you. And I think it's important to think about a couple of things. If you're approached by somebody with whom you do not have a relationship that's deep and substantive, the first thing I encourage you to do is to do some reflection. Do you have the bandwidth to get to know them? And if not, it's really okay to decline. The second point I would make is, in my experience, and I think in Kim's as well, a successful process typically spans more than 1 year. And then not all applicants are successful on the first attempt. And then there's some need for some support for those applicants. But it shouldn't be viewed as the end of the world. There are many people active in the academy today who didn't get in on the first attempt. The next point I would make is I think you need to realize that you are the editor-in-chief. And there is really some work that goes into having a successful application packet. And one of the things that's just so essential is internal consistency without duplication. And that takes some time and typically some editing and revision to actually accomplish. If I get the next slide, please. So here are some tactics that I have found and other colleagues have found successful. If you're in a practice organization, one of the first things I always did when I was recruiting a leader was one of the variables for me was, did they have the potential to to qualify for fellowship, either right around the time of hire or after they had been in the organization for a while. The next thing we did was create a system to identify people with high potential. And should they be interested or should they approach you? I really encourage you, first of all, to develop a plan with them, to sit down and talk about that, to be prepared to critique their progress and their application, and to not be shy about that. And if you are the primary sponsor, your job is to help that applicant secure a second sponsor. And my recommendation is always that they be someone who also understands the practice, the military, or the policy environment, whatever area the person is coming from. So how can we frame this individual impact? In the organizations that I've had the honor of leading, there've always been a cadre of the individual contributors, the advanced practice nurse who absolutely shines. My question is, do they shine and contribute in a way beyond their role in my organization? Are they active in organizations that, such as Kim mentioned? Are they framing policy decisions? What are they doing? So that's one type of application that you might be thinking of. The second one is one that Kim spoke about quite a bit, and that is those of us who have led or are leading currently small, medium, large organizations or systems. And I believe it's really important to, come to grips with the fact that it's highly unusual that a leader can accomplish something that meets the criteria that Mario has so eloquently explained just by themselves. Having served on the Fellow Selection Committee, I've read a fair amount of applications where the potential applicant and sponsors are writing it from a lens of one person did all of this by themselves, and that is usually unlikely. What I would be looking for is how did they work through others? How did they take their intellectual capital, their professional leadership, and work that through their system by leading teams, by leading colleagues, and then looking at how can you track this from conception really to outcomes, to be specific about how the applicant may have had the idea, framed it, whatever, and then tracking that through the work of others to get to those significant outcomes that are supported by data or widespread adoption. So there needs to be a way to measure and talk about the outcomes that they are articulating. Finally, it's important that they articulate their impact beyond their role and their organization. You've now heard this from 3 speakers today. And that impact can be in shaping policy, it can be shaping in practice, it can be in improving care, but it does need to be beyond their organization. And I had an eye on the chat earlier about the issue of publication. And I'm not going to get into that other than to say, I've seen a lot of applications that had publications listed that were simply a string, and I'm not belittling them because I've written them myself, internal communication or editorial in an in-house newsletter. I think that's wonderful, but I don't think it meets the criteria for the external leadership that we would be looking for. Just checking my notes here to make sure I don't miss anything. I would close by framing these last comments and saying that the individual contribution that the applicant chooses, and you vet it with them, becomes the framework or the rubric for the entire application. So I would encourage you to look at their CV for consistency and documentation of that work. I've already talked about the long list of editorials or internal talks really not meeting that bar. And then finally, 3 points about after the application is submitted. First of all, be prepared to support them if they're not selected. Of course, by the time this has gone in, you are, very much believing that it will be a successful application. As I often say, hope is not a plan. And if you're hoping about an application, there might be a little bit more work to do. Secondly, if they're successful, which we want them to be prepared to attend the policy conference with them, introduce them to your networks if they are not already involved, and attend the induction ceremony so that you can really celebrate that fellowship with them. And then the third point is something that I believe is important, and I've seen mixed results with this, and that is to really reinforce your personal expectation that they will be engaged with the Academy work. They will have addressed this in the application, but I've seen people who view this as, quote, their capstone accomplishment and haven't come to a meeting and haven't joined an expert panel and really haven't offered their expertise to the Academy. So I think the sponsor has a responsibility to talk about that up front with the applicant that they're sponsoring. So thank you, and I'll hand it back to Mario.
Great. Thank you so much, Maureen. That was just excellent. Um, we appreciate the perspective of you guiding sponsors very, very clearly in their significant role in working with applicants, that this isn't all on the burden of the applicant, but that the two sponsors and the applicant must work very closely. And I think you highlighted some very important items that can be taken and used so that the application is as successful as possible. So thank you so very much. There are some questions. One that came up, it was specific for Kim, but I think Maureen, you can answer it too. People were looking at, can you describe some examples of what would be clear impact in an application?
All right, Maureen, do you want to take it or do you want me to answer?
Why don't you answer and I'll
Okay,
chime
and
in.
you can chime in. So, what I have seen in my time on the Fellow Selection Committee and in people that I have sponsored is that the impact is in things like board service. So people have been on the boards of their college, or they have been appointed to the State Board of Nursing. So those are broader perspectives where you are changing practice for an entire state of nurses. And some of those have national implication. So there may be work that's being done at a state level that has the potential to go to other states. So I think that, and there's usually numbers attached to that. So New York State has, I don't know, 865,000 nurses or something like that. And so when you're on the state board, and you're reviewing different issues with nurses, you have the chance to impact over 800,000 nurses. So being able to put numbers in this is important. What other examples, Maureen?
I'm thinking about that individual contributor
Mhm.
role. Um, and a advanced practice clinical nurse specialist, internationally known in the area of pain management. So not a bench researcher, but really a practice person who was involved in setting international standards in the Pain Society,
Mhm.
was involved at the Joint Commission, and her day job was helping us take better care of patients in our organization.
Yeah.
Also, I'm thinking of a CNO applicant of a medium-sized system who was inducted a few years ago and was one of the applications that my dyad reviewed. And she took how she was thinking about and implementing programs related to a nurse residency program for newly prepared baccalaureate new to practice nurses. how it spread throughout her whole system very intentionally, but then also went into work at two different professional organizations for consideration and adoption. So you could see that path all along the way.
Right, right.
That's great. That's great. Um, um, there are some questions about um, what would you advise somebody who has been in a role for a long time, but they haven't been in that role for 5, 10 years because now they're in a new role, but they feel that their past impact could be serving as their focus for their current application. How would you advise that? Because I know often we get lots of applications where somebody is sort of either at the end of their career or they did a lot of good work 15, 10, 20 years ago, and we struggle with those applicants sometimes. So could you two sort of add some of your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that some of your past work is worthy. As long as you can as long as you can quantify it, sometimes that initial impact is what moves a career forward. So it's relevant at that point. Um, and I think that a lot of this is the package, as Maureen has said. It's how well the personal statement is crafted, and a lot of that is on the sponsors to really look critically at this and be very frank about what isn't working and where more discussion about impact is needed. Um, and then the sponsors each picking something perhaps a little different to amplify, or amplifying slightly different things about the same work that someone has. Um, but I think that I have seen and reviewed successful applications where some work that was done maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago was the catapult, right? That was the thing that pushed people forward. And it's still relevant today. I think that's the other piece, is that work that was done in the past has to be something that has relevance for today because it's addressing a problem that we haven't solved, and we have so many of those.
That's great.
I will
Maureen, do you want
say
to add?
the worst thing is applications where the sponsors cut and paste from the applicant statement.
That's right.
Just it drives us all nuts.
That's right. Maureen, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think Kit did a great job on that
Okay.
one.
Okay, great. Great. And then there was a few different questions and a few different Q&A that came up in regards to not just impact, but what are some of the best ways of how people should write about their impact and what's considered impact. And I'll sort of start us off with that.
Mhm.
So many people will apply for either a research grant or a HRSA grant. They get it, they implement it, and they think that's their impact. And to us, we see hundreds of applications with people with grants, HRSA grants, NIH grants. What we're looking for, what I sort of call is like the drum roll, but bump is they get the HRSA grant, they serve a community or they serve students, then they get another grant that has further impact. Then, because of that impact, they get asked to speak on some policy forum. From that, they get asked to serve on some policy committee within some national organization. Then they realize that three other national organizations are working on very similar issues. They pull together those three other organizations and they work on policies together for a bigger impact. So it started off as a grant, moved them, as Kim said, that impact moved them to become known for community work and community policy, and that moved them to have more than a regional impact, but now a state and a national impact. So that's a very when I see applications move seamlessly like that, you know exactly what this person's going to move to, and then their sponsors highlight certain aspects of their work over time.
Yeah. And you made a good point about the applicant who is worthy of the academy is someone who goes above and beyond and pulls that group together. We all have lots of people in a network, but they go that extra step to say, hey, all of you who are in this HRSA grant pool for whatever, we should come together and do X, right? And so I think that's the piece. You've got lots of things going on that are great, but you're going to take that extra step and say, I need to pull everybody in New York City together to solve this problem. Or I want to use my role in the New York Organization of Nurse Leaders as a platform, and I want everybody in New York State to solve this problem, right? It's taking it a step further to make the world a better place.
Maureen?
Yeah, I think building on that, um, depending upon what they're highlighting, what area they've chosen, quantification is really important. Is it measurable? Um, and there's a fine line here. I read an application once, where someone said they'd impact, basically half of a country, and it didn't have any documentation for it. So our dyad, went through that application numerous times saying, we wish this was here. And if they had been able to go the next step, it would have contributed to success in a major way.
Right, right. And I think, when we see these grant statements in applications, one thing when I shared working with a dyad from another CNO in a big system, we kept seeing things like I mentored, I mentored over 750 nurses. And then they talk about it, and we're like, if you're a chief nurse, you cannot mentor that many nurses, right? But you can create a system from which there is identifiable, quantifiable outcomes of mentorship, orientation. So if somebody would write about it in that aspect, that's how their impact was designing a organizational system, then that's okay. But for one person to say that hands-on, they were doing all of that mentoring, you just lost us as your reviewer because there's little evidence that we could say you don't have that much time to mentor that many people.
Right?
There are a few questions about service. So, so I'll sort of off on this. We get many applications that are not successful because we get either a short list or a laundry list of people who serve on boards, on committees.
Mhm.
But as Dr. Glassman said earlier, they don't tell you how they use that position to make impact in other ways. So serving on a state board of nursing, wonderful, right? But that cannot be your only effort to show impact because the service isn't the impact. It's the service with what you did with the ability to
Right.
have that position on the board beyond the board.
I think those board comments are really very important um, in terms of if the applicant's going down that path, what might they have done on a board that impacted a community um,
Mhm.
or a profession, as Mario has said, not simply that they're on the board.
Yeah, there's something that's happening on that board that's providing the impact. The board service alone is similar to doing a really good job and a really big job.
Yeah.
But that board is doing something. And you are part of that something that is happening. So that's where I've seen that be successful in an aspect of this. And the board, whatever the board is, it can be quantified, right? The people they serve, numbers of people they serve. So I think that's important.
Right, right. And there are a few questions around role. And so things like do you have to serve in a role as a CNO, a CEO, a dean,
Oh no.
whatever? And the answer is no. There's been many applications that have been brought through by nurses working within certain divisions within hospitals, community clinics.
Mhm.
One of the most significant ones I ever read was a nurse who saw a problem as this person was working within a health system with their discharged homeless people. So this person took action, talked to on the local community, worked with the city, created all these policies, then also created a a transition housing unit, right? So this person's work kept improving, but that person continued to be working as a nurse. I mean, eventually moved into homeless work, but that was started by somebody who saw the problem and identified it. But as Kim and Maureen said, they were able to pull the right people together to have an impact that was sustained over time. And I'm sure Maureen and Kim, you've seen applications and sponsored people who are not in direct leadership roles.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of people in what you would consider sort of non-traditional type
Right,
role.
right, right,
Uh,
I think the criteria are similar.
mhm.
You know, I can think of a couple of applications that my dyad partner and I reviewed over time, where the person was either primarily a policy person or perhaps had a military background. And I
right.
think I just saw something go by in the chat from Eileen Sullivan Marks. I mean, it's an issue to talk about with the sponsor, but I think anyone who is doing work leading large groups, the concepts are the same in terms of how to have a successful application.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. And I think it's very important as you work with your sponsor and then the sponsor with each other is to identify, are we amplifying everything enough so that it is clear, right? So, I read and we talk about this a lot within the Fellows Selection Committee, is like, we're trying to understand the life from your view, right? So you have to lead us along your career journey that leads to your impact journey that leads to substantive, sustained impact over time. So we're trying to follow it. At the same time, we're looking at the sponsor statements, we're looking at the CV, and we keep going back and forth, saying that at first we may say no evidence. Then we go back and we say some evidence. Then we go back and say, wow, there's a lot of stuff once we got into
Mhm.
the depths. So you really have to lead us through the narrative in a very clear way, because oftentimes there's a lot of applications that where the applicant doesn't get inducted because their application reads as a lot of busy work, but we can't tease out what the clear impact is because they're busy on all types of things, good work, but not enough for us to say clear impact in these one or two areas.
And I would say what Mario you had noted before, this CV is really important. So a lot of this work, consultations, board service, what have you, or pulling together people in a city or a region, you've got to get that on the CV. And some of these things are not easily done. So if you're pulling together a region to solve a problem, I would call that a consortium or something like that. So you've got to get it there. And in my experience, just with people that I've sponsored, this is an iterative process, right? You have conversations and something pops out that is incredibly notable, and now you've got to get it on the CV. So it is a constant crosswalk between what people think is their initial contribution, and through many iterative conversations, it turns out there's a whole bunch of other stuff there. Some of it is really important, and it may be more impactful than what they originally thought. But it's all got to be on the CV because that is some of the evidence that supports what was being done. So if there's a disconnect, then that's tough.
Something else I would add to this discussion is it's very helpful if you've put a system in place in your organization, with a goal of having people achieve fellowship, having someone who is not the sponsor and intimately involved read that application before it goes in. to identify the gaps or the overlaps or the inconsistency uh, really can be very powerful.
Right.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
agree that
I agree.
third person serving as sort of a disinterested party in a way, and often is giving harsh feedback. But it's really important, especially if you are a new sponsor or if you have two new sponsors, and bravo. It's nice to have an experienced third person guide the team, and I found that to be very successful.
Right. Right. And I think too, if even as you're writing the application and you're going back and forth between each section, it is okay, even at that time, if everyone's sort of struggling with it, that maybe your impact isn't quite ready yet. That it's
Mhm.
okay not to submit, or to have people you ask to be your sponsor to say, would love to, but not right now. Right?
Yeah.
Let's work on it for the next year or 18 months and try and gather everything together, especially for people. There are a few comments in the chat and in the Q&A um, about, do you have, if you have two areas that you're going up for your individual contribution, do you have to address each of those two areas for sustained, substantive, and significant? And the answer is yes. Like, you
Mhm.
can't do one for significant and one for substantive. They all, if you have one or three, you have to talk about each of those areas. That's why it's some of the applicants that struggle is where they list a lot of stuff and try and talk about a lot of impact all over the place. And that's difficult for us to decipher what's the true clear impact over time if they're doing a lot of work all over the place and no one really reins in that application.
That's right. I think sometimes those are issues with people who have had longer careers. So they've done more stuff. And then it's kind of a pick and choose and a focus sometimes. Um, I think two areas of impact is fine. I think three spreads it a little thin. I would never go more than that.
Right,
One or
right.
two usually works
Yeah,
for
agreed.
most people. You know, um, I just had a conversation with someone recently where they are, just suddenly thinking of doing the academy, and my advice was they should wait and we should work together. But many times people are well intended and they'll say to someone, "Oh, you should be in the academy," and I think we don't think through that that person takes that seriously because X said, "Oh, I should be in the academy." And so what I've advised people is the next time someone says, "Oh, you should be in the academy," say to them why. Why? Make them tell you why they think you're worthy of the academy. Because I think we say these things to be nice. Um, but that can backfire if somebody suddenly says, "Oh, I should do this," but they aren't ready. And that's where, as Maureen noted, it's really important to say, you need some perking time here.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there are a few easy ways to sort of get a litmus on that. Is
Mhm.
that, you know, like, how do you want to be known? And then ask people if they know you in that way,
Yeah.
right? So if someone says Kim Glassman, well, I know exactly, like, I'm thinking NYU, NYU hospitals, Hurricane, because I knew about her work prior to meeting her. But what she did had already had an impact. So you can just ask people and say, if you say my name out there, what do you think? Or like, what would you find out? Right. So,
Yep.
that's one thing. Some people were asking about for early career or even mid-career that they may not have enough evidence because they haven't been in over time. But I think that also speaks to impact, right? Like,
Mhm.
if you don't have a lot of evidence yet, then as a reviewer, I would question, then how much impact have you had?
Right. Right. And yet we've all been reviewers on early career researchers who were slam dunks.
Yep.
They had a unique niche topic, and they must have had great mentoring because they really were able to get grants early. They did community work early. They were able to demonstrate impact earlier than some. And that's just, I think, the topic that you choose or the area that you're working in that makes that work.
Right. And just some things is that someone said earlier about, some people don't get in their on first time, and then you apply again the next year. That's a time when you talk to your sponsors and you change one out or you
Mhm.
bring one in and you figure out who can really help you articulate because you want to make sure that and we don't see anything from the year before. That's done. It's a whole new
That's right.
application, so you have to treat it like a brand new application. And there was also a few people who asked that if you're newer or mid-career, there's no level within the academy where you can apply as a member if you're not a fan. But there is CANS, so you can be on the Council for the Advancement of Nursing Science, and that's a great way to start to get a feel for what the Academy stands for its work, research, policy, implementation, and then it's also a good way to meet many fellows in the Academy because they also are members of CANS.
I did cans first.
Oh, did you? Okay.
I did a million years ago, but yeah.
I think the other point I would make is that non-fellows can come to the policy conference. And that's another way to understand at a deeper level what the organization is all about
Right.
Yeah.
and
Right.
to meet people and to network.
Exactly. Exactly. And then you can also, one thing about that is that you see the people that you probably read about, and then you can walk up to them and introduce yourself, and it's,
Mhm.
it's great. It's a very non-intimidating place to be because it's a busy time at the academic conferences, but people are always willing to, say hello and meet people. So I think that's a good point, Maureen. Yeah. Okay, we'll try to take one more question because we are about 4:12. Um, Let me scroll down here. People are asking, are there specific examples or is there a sufficient narrative type from which to delineate significant, substantive, and sustained impacts? I think I would answer that initially by saying, become very familiar with the definitions that we provided. Prior to this, there weren't definitions. So we would get applicants all over the place because nobody could really harness in what we were looking for. So now as you address in this 250 word count for each of those sections, be really clear that you're focused on that definition, right? So you can even say the sustained impact is, and even use some of the words from our definition to relate clearly to what you did because now the selection committee, and I think it's up to about 30 people on the committee from when we three were on the committee. So they'll be in about 10 triads with 3 people in each triad. So now they have clear guidelines and they have a rubric that follows the definitions that follows each of the narrative. So they'll have a lot of tools at their disposal to sort of tease out what your individual contribution is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this new version is going to be phenomenal.
Yes.
Way more clarity than in the past.
Right.
And each year it's gotten better.
That was great. That's great. Good. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you found this session helpful. The fellow selection committee members are simply outstanding. They uphold the rigor, fairness, and professionalism of the selection process and bring their unique expertise and lens, their time and commitment in such a valuable resource to the Academy. I would like to thank our speakers for sharing their excellent insights today, and two of my, great loving colleagues. A recording of this webinar will be posted on the Academy's website by the end of the week. So visit www.aannet.org for more information. And thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.